The movie begins with our protagonist, Mason, when he was young, talking about how fed up he was with school and education. In short, he wasn't really doing well in school. Eventually, Mason applied to the army, and after a few years, he joined the Special Forces. His life changed completely, and he became highly respected. Later, he gets assigned a mission in a country called Bedonia, along with his team, to assassinate the president, Finny. However, the president figures out their plan and shoots down their helicopter with an RPG. The helicopter crashes, killing everyone except Mason, who gets severely injured. Unfortunately, the mission fails. Mason then decides to leave the army and becomes a lawyer. A few years later, we see Mason living a normal life. He's married and has a daughter. However, his relationship with his wife is very tense because she sees him as a failure. One day, Mason is taking his daughter to school, and on the way, she tells him that a boy is bothering her at school. He tells her, "If anyone messes with you, break his teeth." Afterward, Mason heads to his office. While he's there, his friend Sebastian walks in. Sebastian, after leaving the army, became very successful and now owns a big security company. Sebastian offers Mason a quick job in Bedonia. Mason refuses, saying, "There's no way I'm going back to that place." But Sebastian responds, "I'm telling you, you'll get $200,000 for this job." Mason looks at him and says, "Who said I wasn't going back there?" He agrees immediately. Later that night, Mason's wife argues with him and asks for a divorce, just like any typical woman. Mason asks her, "What happened, my dear?" She replies, "Your daughter took your advice and broke her classmate's teeth. So please, just leave me and go. We'll be fine without you." The poor guy packs his things and leaves the house. The next day, Mason picks up the journalist, Claire, from her home, and they head to the airport. She tells him, "Grab the bag and follow me." While driving, they talk, and Claire learns that Mason used to be in the Special Forces. She tells him, "You're probably wondering why we chose Bedonia, right? Well, I'll tell you. It's all about its vast oil and natural gas reserves. Finny is a reclusive leader who has never given a single interview before." Mason replies, "That guy was the reason most of my comrades died." Claire responds, "All I care about is getting this interview." They arrive in Bedonia, where Finny greets them at the airport. He even agrees to a sit-down interview with Claire, much to her surprise, because they used to be engaged. While in the car, Finny surprises Mason by revealing he knows everything about him, including that he was a Special Forces officer and that his teammates died in a mission here, with Mason being the sole survivor. As their car moves through the convoy, the first car suddenly explodes. Claire screams, "Help me, Mason!" A group of rebels appears, and Mason steps in to protect Claire. He tells them, "Move aside!" Mason takes the driver's seat after the driver is killed and manages to reverse the car, crashing into the vehicle behind them. He then rams into the car in front, turning it into a wreck like the one behind. He gets out and takes down the remaining attackers by himself. Claire is amazed and can't believe her eyes. Even Finny compliments him, saying that Mason single-handedly ended the coup and is like an army all by himself. Mason responds, "Yeah, I know." He then tells Claire to get in the car so they can leave, as his mission is to secure and protect her. But Claire is more focused on getting the interview with Finny, seeing it as a major scoop since she'd be interviewing him during a coup. Mason tells her, "Come on, lady, there's no time for that." They head into the forest to escape. As for Finny, he stayed behind tracking them. When Bayer saw Mason with a phone connected to a satellite, Mason was calling Sebastian to tell him what happened and ask him to act fast and get them out of there. Sebastian replied that he would track their location using GPS and send someone to pick them up. After that, Finny asked to make a call from Mason's phone, and Claire told him to hand over the phone. Finny took the phone and called his brother, saying, "How are you, my dear? I know you're worried about me, so I wanted to reassure you that I'm still alive, and I'll be seeing you soon." Meanwhile, Jorge was getting nervous about what happened, and the general came in to tell him that their partners in the coup wouldn't stay quiet and were going to cause more trouble. But Jorge had forgotten the line was still open. After Finny finished his call with his nephew, he said to everyone, "I just wanted to make sure my nephew was the one who orchestrated the coup, and now I'm certain." Mason replied, "You can wait for your generals to come and get you, but Claire and I are going to stay here and figure things out." Mason thought Sebastian would come to save them. At that moment, Mason received a call from one of Sebastian's men, who asked him to provide their exact location. After finding out where they were, the man told them they had 2 minutes until he arrived. Sure enough, after 2 minutes, they saw a helicopter approaching. Mason turned to Claire and said, "We're finally getting out of here and going back home. After that, God will take care of the rest." But then they were surprised by armed men, and another confrontation happened. Mason realized there was betrayal, so he ran into the forest and told Claire to run fast. The gunmen started shooting at them, but luckily, no one was hit. They reached a lake and crossed it, and just then, they saw another helicopter coming their way. Mason grabbed his sniper rifle and shot the pilot until he was sure he was dead. But unfortunately, the helicopter kept coming toward them, as if it was determined to take them out. Mason told Claire to run fast, and both of them started running as fast as they could. But in the end, they got separated, and Claire found herself alone. She was scared and called out for Mason. Then, she saw one of the gunmen approaching her, and she was terrified. But suddenly, Mason appeared and began fighting the gunman in a brutal and violent manner. In the end, Mason managed to take him down. Afterward, he reassured Claire, saying, "I'm fine." But they were both shocked when Finny appeared behind Mason and shot him, saying, "Here you are, my dear, weren't you asking about me?" Then Finny took the young men and went to hide with his friends in a safe place. They thanked Mason for saving them from death. Meanwhile, Jorge was watching the helicopter that had exploded, and at that moment, Colonel Kohar arrived and told him that the investors wanted to be sure their investments in this country would continue. Jorge replied, "That will happen when my uncle dies, and I take control." Kohar responded, "You'll make us unhappy, and those who anger us won't survive." At that moment, Kohar killed his assistant. In the other scene, Claire is finally conducting the interview with Vinny Jas. She starts the interview by asking him about the reasons behind the assassination attempt and says, "Who do you think is behind this coup?" He responds, explaining that foreign powers had been exploiting his country's resources for a very long time, up until he took power and became an obstacle in their way. Their only goal now is to get rid of him, all because he chose the interests of his people over his own personal gain. At that moment, Claire sees how much the people love him and appreciate him, and they're happy that Vinny is still with them. They realize that true power doesn't lie in the hands of the CIA or the FBI, but that both agencies are merely pawns in the hands of big corporations and global business owners. When Claire asks Vinny if these global corporations had threatened him, he replies, "Our country's soil contains a substance called lanthanitates, which is used in manufacturing all digital devices. When these corporations wanted to buy the substance at a low price, I refused and told them that the amount they offered was far too little because it's worth much more. I thought I was doing a service to my country and my people, but the companies wouldn't allow anyone to control them or their business. So, they decided to get rid of me." During this conversation, Mason is filming the entire interview on Claire's phone. Later that night, they all go out to celebrate, spending the night eating, drinking, and dancing. The next morning, Mason calls Sebastian and asks, "Why did you send me to this country if you knew a coup was going to happen?" Sebastian responds, "Yes, I knew. And the big corporations specifically asked me to send you because they know you hate Vinny and would take him out. Honestly, I was expecting you to do just that." After Mason hangs up, he calls his wife and daughter to check on them, telling them how much he loves them, and asking them to take care of themselves. Then he tells Claire that they need to get out of there quickly. But at the same time, Kohar arrives with his armed men, searching for Vinny to finish him off. The president tells them they need to escape with him, and he knows a friend who has a car they can use. They rush off together, but when they arrive, they're shocked to find that the car his friend owns is actually a tractor. So, Mason and Claire decide to each take a horse, while Vinny Jas chooses to face his enemies head-on. Vinny Jas goes to Coer and tells him that he's not afraid of them. But Mason shows up, pulls him onto the horse, and they ride off. Then, we go back to Claire, who's trying to escape, but unfortunately, her horse trips and she falls, getting captured by the armed men chasing them. Meanwhile, Mason and Vinny Jas reach a safe place. Vinny Jas says to Mason, "I know you don't like me because you think I'm responsible for the death of your comrades, but the truth is, I had nothing to do with it. When I found out that you were coming to assassinate me, I had already prepared a boat to escape to Cuba, and from there, I planned to flee because I know my country is weak and can't stand up to the American army. But the person who fired the missiles at you was Coer, the same man chasing us now, and he did it in coordination with the big corporations to make it look like there are terrorist operations in our country. This would give the U.S. military an excuse to enter the country whenever they want." Mason is shocked to realize that he and his comrades were just pawns in a political game between governments and major international corporations. After some time, they both find a place to hide. At this point, Vinny Jas tells Mason that he's decided to surrender himself to Coer and his armed men because Claire is innocent and doesn't deserve any of this. The next day, a man named Edward arrives at the church, greets Vinny Jas, and Vinny Jas tells Mason, "Edward is the leader of the opposition party." Mason is surprised by what's happening and doesn't understand any of it. Vinny Jas explains, "There has to be an opposition in the country, so I chose my friend Edward to lead the opposition so he could publicly oppose my views. After that, we'll sit down together and come to an agreement to solve the country's problems, which will all look very nice and proper. But in reality, everything is agreed upon between us, and I even choose the locations where the explosions will happen." After that, Vinny Jas decides to turn himself in instead of Claire. At this point, Mason is ready and armed, anticipating any confrontation. Coer arrives, and knowing Mason well, he tells him he doesn't want anyone to die and that the exchange must go smoothly without any issues. At that moment, Vinny Jas shows up, followed by a large group of rebels and opposition forces. They start firing at Crest and his armed men, which was, of course, part of a prearranged plan with Vinny Jas. Mason seizes the chaos to take Claire and Vinny Jas, and they make a quick escape. Afterward, Vinny Jas leads them into a tunnel that was originally built to escape the palace in emergencies, and now they use it to sneak into the palace. Meanwhile, Vinny Gas's nephew, Jorge, prepares to take the throne in his uncle's place, but when he sees his uncle, he becomes very scared and grabs a gun. At the same time, Mason also draws his gun, ready for anything. But Vinny Jas reassures his nephew, telling him not to worry and to calm down. He also tells him that he's not angry and that he'll forgive him. At this moment, the general arrives and tells Jorge that the big corporations won't leave him alone. The general pulls out his gun and shoots Vinny Jas and Jorge, but Jorge manages to kill the general before he dies. As for Vinny Jas, he was wearing a bulletproof vest, so he's unharmed. Just then, the country's military forces storm the scene, demanding Vinny Jas surrender. Behind them, Crest's forces enter as well. But Vinny Jas keeps telling the army that they are the ones who are supposed to protect this country, and that they need to defend it. He explains that Crest is exploiting them and will get rid of them if they stand against his interests. Eventually, the army commander is convinced by Vinny Gas's words and starts fighting Crest's forces, leading to a fierce battle between them. During the chaos, Mason grabs Claire and tries to get her out of this charged situation. Claire had been recording everything on her phone. As they get outside, a violent fight breaks out between Mason and Coer. Coer confesses that he was the one who killed Mason's friends and tells him to say hello to them because Mason will be joining them soon. But before Coer can kill Mason, Claire arrives just in time, hits Coer on the head, and takes Mason so they can escape. As they attempt to flee, they find that the military forces are still battling Crest's men. Mason decides to take a weapon from a fallen soldier and starts shooting. Claire becomes very impressed with him at that moment. Meanwhile, Sebastian shows up with a large force, fighting alongside Mason against Crest's men. After that, the videos Claire had recorded are broadcast on TV, and everyone starts talking about Claire's interview with Vinny Gas. Later, we see Vinny Gas addressing the public, announcing his resignation and declaring that there will be presidential elections. At this point, Mason's wife is watching TV and sees her husband standing beside Vinny Gas, realizing he's a hero. Shortly after, Mason returns home and hugs his daughter. Then, he receives a message from Vinny Gas, thanking him for everything he did in Bedonia and telling him that he sent him a small gift. Mason checks his account and finds that Vinny Gas had transferred $5 million to him. Mason is thrilled and decides to get back to work, telling his wife, "This job is for the hard workers, but we're now in the Millionaires Club." He then takes his daughter and wife out to spend the whole day together. And with that, our movie ends today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe if you liked the video.